snagging is probably this skill that you have used, you have seen it, you have been told to use it, but you probably don't really know a whole lot about it. And that's okay. It is probably the most inconsistent skill in the entire Fisher's kit, and it is, in my opinion, one of the ones that needs probably the biggest overhaul, and it drives me nuts. Like it genuinely drives me nuts. If you've been around the fish court, you've heard me rant about snagging a few times. So here is the snagging rant in audio form. Snagging is a skill that its description basically says adds extra hooks to the line, making it possible to land normally uncatchable fish and items. It was added in patch 3.0, Heavensward, and it was basically added as a way to give fishers access to gathering maps, because botanists can reap and trim their way into maps. Miners can pick and sledge their way into maps, and at the time, Fisher could not do any of that. So this allowed Fisher to catch maps from various fishing holes, and what they also did was make it so certain non-fish items could also be caught with snagging, and would only be caught with snagging if snagging was on. This includes fish like clams, mussels, bivalves, things that don't necessarily hunt for its prey. Magic Bucket requires snagging. The Impaler is a big fish in Dragonspine that requires snagging, and it's the only big fish that requires snagging, if I remember correctly. And it is also very inconsistent, because when it was added, it was basically properly added, quote unquote properly. I don't know if that's the right word, but it was quote unquote properly added to most big fish, most fish and some big fish in Heavensward. But even though it is a level 36 skill, it was not back added or retroactively added to a Realm Reborn fish, which is fine. That I get. Because that's extra work. You've already had, a year or two of people fishing without it. It would have been a little bit weird to actually do that. So you would think then, moving forward, it would be more consistent, and then it wasn't. But even within, even in Stormblood, it started being not consistent, and then Shadowbringers and Endwalker, and now Dawntrail, it probably has the least amount of use. And it was weird because in Heavensward, certain clams required snagging, and some clams did not. And I was thinking, oh, maybe it's maybe it was just smooth shell clams for some odd reason, because fishing has gone to that level of detail, like specific species of fish biting on certain bait because it's that species of fish, not because of anything else, like game wise. And I thought it was like, oh, maybe it was just smooth shell clams, and well, that didn't hold up, because you follow through. Stormblood, yeah, some of the smooth shells, and Walker didn't have a bunch, kind of there. And then you get to Living Memory, and Devotion Clam, which is a smooth shell clam, does also require snagging, but it's not there. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's just like cooking clams, like clams that are used in cooking, and that's not true, because Fang Clam is used in clam chowder, and it's in South Banepool, which is in Korthus Highlands. I can't remember if it's Central or West. It's not the one in A Realm Reborn. Not the one with Horshaphant. It is the ones with Falcon's Nest. And it does not require snagging, despite it being in food or being used, but it is also a mooch. And this was the one weird thing where it almost feels like snagging only works on straight catch fish rather than mooched fish. And I'll get back to this in a second because there's another fish that I think should use it, but doesn't. And then I was like, oh, maybe they just have it for like a toggle for custom delivery fish. And Chalky Coral for Emeliance from Endwalker doesn't use snagging. But the other custom delivery fish, like red corals, which I believe is for Chloe, does require snagging. And then you get like urchins. The urchins are actually fine. Like those are like the most consistent species, with the exception of wild urchins, which are caught in ocean fishing. Hopefully you're getting the point here. It's like, just because it's a clam, it doesn't require snag. Like, just because it's a clam doesn't necessarily mean it requires snagging. And just because it's a certain type of clam doesn't mean that it requires snagging. Or just because it's used in a certain thing doesn't mean it requires snagging. I have not been able to find a pattern in what works and what uses snagging and what doesn't. I haven't been able to figure it out. If someone can figure it out, like, please let me know. But I mean, you kind of get the point. There's no consistency in snagging whatsoever, and it's a really cool idea of a skill, because depending on the fish in the fishing hole, you might have to use it or not. And if you have to use it, then you have extra fish to contend with. It might change a strategy. By default, when we talk about big fishing or fishing in general, we almost never say turn on snagging. The only big fish we will say to turn on snagging for is the impaler, because it requires it. When it comes to every other fish, we have you turn it off because it just adds fish to the pool. It makes it harder. It isn't efficient if you're going for big fish, which many people try to be efficient. And so it's just like, you don't, the dynamic that it could have isn't really there because it's off by default. Like, it's because there isn't like a consistent reason to use it. Even within the big fish, there wasn't consistency of, you should be using, like, do you need snagging or not, even on fish where it should exist. And I get like they're intentionally kind of obscure and a little bit inconsistent, because that's just kind of how fishing works. That's part of the community design of it. The community what's the word that I want to use? Community engagement around it. Like, there are skills like Monster Hunter does this too, where they intentionally obfuscate and kind of blur definitions of skills or mechanics in order to encourage the community to work. It's a community building thing. Like, that's how it works. And because of that, that's why we have such a broad, vast, and passionate fishing community. That's why I'm able to make a rant that's already almost like 9 minutes long, talking about a single level 36 skill that was added 10 years ago. And so I get why, but the part of the issue is that it doesn't, like, if you're going to be doing something intentional, it needs to be consistently intentionally obscure, if that makes sense. Like, if one clam, if it's meant to bring in, snagging is meant to bring in maps, that's consistent. You always need to use snagging to catch a map. That's fine. But if it's like you have to use it for clams, then all of the clams should also require snagging. All of the urchins should require snagging. All of the bivalves, like, there are 3 or 4 different species of clams just in this game that have inconsistency within them of, do they require snagging a lot? The fang clams, the razor clams, the smooth shell clams that are kind of like the ones that you'd see on a beach, among other mollusks. Like, we have sea cucumbers. Well, actually, no, they're more sea slugs than they're cucumbers. And if they could make it a little bit more engaging and interesting and reliable, then it could be a rather fun and easy way to make some fishing holes far more interesting, or just far more dynamic, or have different things. Like one of the fish that, and this isn't me saying, let's make lancet fish harder, but one of the fishing holes where you could have added something to make it interesting would be the Caliban Gap, West Caliban Gap, Caliban Gap, Caliban Gorge. I forget exactly which the name of the fishing hole for lancet is, but that's not the point. The point is, in that fishing hole, there is a snagging fish. It is sweet flesh mussel, I believe, sweet flesh oyster, one of the two. Okay, future fruity here. As I was listening back to this example that I was about to give, it sucked. So I'm going to just go through and make a few corrections, and kind of redo it slightly and a little bit quicker. So here we go. Northwest Caliban Gorge, which is the name of the fishing hole that I was trying to get, has 2 snagging fish in it, specifically the sweet meat mussel and Sycorax. Sycorax actually bites pretty decently under snagging, which is why I picked this fishing hole in the first place, but my brain hadn't caught up to the fact that it was because of Sycorax. Doesn't matter. The main thing, though, is imagine that lancet fish was a snagging fish. So Moritecta doesn't need snagging whatsoever. That's fine, but just pretend that lancet fish did. You would have to turn snagging on for that, and that would change the strategy for how you approach lancet fish. Because it adds Sycorax and sweet meat mussels to the fishing hole, the dominance of powerful hook set is diminished. And so now it brings up, do we slap Stormfish and just slap and chum, or do we use Stormfish or another slap and Ambitious Lure? Could we actually enable Ambitious Lure if you were using snagging versus not? Like, how does that change the bite rates of everything? In practicality, because it's not required, you still typically won't turn on snagging. But if it was required, you now have to look at different things, like, does the strategy change? Having that level of decision making, that layer of control, I think is very interesting for fishing, because now it's a layer of control that you can have that isn't just RNG based. It's very much a new layer of either they bite or they don't. It's not like maybe they bite more often. No, it's an actual bite or they don't. So that was me condensing like 5 minutes of a terribly worded example down into however long this little drop in is. So anyways, we're going to go back to Bass Fruity, and you can finish listening to what I have to say about snagging. So I would love to see snagging come into play for just like a bigger role in fishing. I think right now it's been getting diminished to the point where I would not be surprised if in 8.0 they not really remove snagging, but my guess is if they could, they would probably take snagging and salvage and combine them into one. I would not be surprised if that's the case, mostly because it's just 2 skills that basically do the exact same thing for 2 different types of fish. Fishing types. Snagging and salvage are both primarily used to get maps. Salvage exclusively to get maps, but for spearfishing. So if they combine them down into one, I would not be surprised. But on the other hand, if they're going to do that, maybe don't get rid of this interesting skill. I think snagging is interesting enough that I would love to see it come into play for bigger fish. And just more consistently, like if it is a clam, it requires snagging. If it is a razor, like if it's any form of clam or bivalve, if it doesn't hunt for its own prey or voluntarily bites a hook, I believe that's technically the legal definition of snagging, and I'll get to that in a second. If it does not, if a creature does not voluntarily bite its hook, which basically is going to be clams, mussels, anemones, kelps, and a couple of other fish that I will talk about in a second, I think it should require snagging. I think that would be a really interesting shakeup to how fishing hole work. I think it would lean into the realism that 14 fishing does play on, while also being able to open up possible vectors for more whimsy, I guess is maybe the word. I know fantasy was right there. That was the right word. But whimsy, I think, is the better way of putting it. Because I think it's very fun to have Fisher in like cosmic exploration bringing up like coins and pot shards. But you should be using snagging for that. Like it would make sense to use snagging for that based on all the other instances that we have used snagging. I think you could start introducing a lot of other fun and wild things that you could be catching fish for. Like it would be maybe fun that a legendary fish is like some weird powerful amulet instead of an actual fish that someone just happened to lose, and it was like some legendary relic instead of a fish. It could require snagging. Those are things that we're looking at. But if they bring it back more into the realm of the real world and pulling on those threads of reality that 14 fishing is based on. I know a lot of people will be like, well, it's a video game, so it doesn't based on real. Final Fantasy 14 is based on real world way more than people give it credit for, and I think that's a bit of a crime, and that's a whole other conversation. But for fishing specifically, of the 1,800 fish in the game, I can name on two hands, I think at this point, in the fishing log, fish that are not based on real life things. Like Aquamaton, obviously not based on a real life thing. Sidereal whale, not based on a real life thing. It is one of the biggest positives for fishing in Final Fantasy that it draws on reality, all the way down to the cast animations. I don't know if anyone else has noticed this. I know a few of you have. Depending on the lure or the tackle or the bait that you're using, there is a different animation when you cast. And that is true to how you end up fishing. If you're fishing with a bait, you have a different type of cast. If you're fishing with a lure, you have one that's going to probably go a little bit longer, especially if it's reeling in, like on shortbill minnow or metal spinner. The one that I think a lot of people miss is if you're using flies, you actually do a fly cast, as if your rod was a fly fishing rod. There is so much reality in Final Fantasy XIV fishing that by saying it's a video game, why do we care, is disregarding so much of what makes fishing in 14 so unique. But because that exists, there are some weirdness that comes up when you look at the type of fish you're catching. Now, the biggest thing that I would say, and probably in my opinion one of the most visible places where snagging could be used, but is not, is in Lake Teori, in Shaolani and Dawn Trail, with the Turali paddlefish and Takatoa. When you are fishing for paddlefish in real life, paddlefish are one of those fish that do not search for their prey. They will just swim around with their mouths open and take in whatever they can get. And the way that you catch paddlefish, and I also have to add the disclaimer here that if you live in an area where paddlefish exist, please make sure that it's legal to actually catch paddlefish. It is legal in some states, especially in like southern US. You can catch paddlefish, but please double check your local and state regulations and make sure that it's legal if you decide to go catch paddlefish yourself this way. They use a technique called snagging, and it is exactly as is described in the game. You add extra hooks to a line, and then you just cast out the line, and you just literally reel back in. And you go, oh, I think there's paddlefish over there. You cast out, with like 7-8 lines tied to your very strong lines, I should point out. Paddlefish are very big, surprisingly. And you basically just reel in over them or around where you think they are, and then hopefully the hook snags into them. That's why it's called snagging. You may have also heard it as foul hooking. That's how you catch paddlefish in real life. and because they're not going to hunt down for prey. You usually catch paddlefish by accident. And so the fact that like we have so much realism in this game, but then you add in the inconsistency of snagging and the fact that the Turali paddlefish, Takatoa, and then Ace Fornesh and Ace Fan in Ultima Thule, I believe in Apohalos Delta. I think it's the one north of the Aetheryte in the Dragon Ward, in the Dragon area. They're all paddlefish, and none of them require snagging. And I think it would be very cool if they could. Now, this does go back to the fact, though, that they are, at least in Lake Teori, for the Turali paddlefish and Takatoa, they are mooch fish. And as we established, they might not allow mooches to use snagging. I think that should change, in my opinion, because I think that would be another really fun thing to do and could be a potential way that they could introduce more control over mooching, which is a whole other conversation to have about why mooching is like, why don't we have a surface slot for mooch? That's a whole other conversation, which may be a future ramble. I don't know. But the point is, if we, with the way that fishing is and the way that it represents the real world, having this inconsistency, especially around snagging, kind of detracts things a little bit. And I think that they should really bring more consistency to snagging, like all clams, snagging, all mussels, snagging, all razor clams, snagging, all paddlefish, snagging, urchins, snagging, even in ocean fishing. I know it's weird, but it does also add like a sense of progression as well. When you look at, snagging is a level 36 skill, which in today's age, not that hard to get. You can get that in, I don't know, an afternoon. So it's not a huge hurdle to reach, and it doesn't hurt, I think, in terms of the progression of fisher, because when you think about that, it's not just the skills, but it's the fishing holes you can access, the fish you can catch. And I think having snagging be more consistent, especially back paddling it into A Realm Reborn, would make more sense and just generally make a more interesting and consistent fishing experience without detracting from that obscurity that fishing is designed around to encourage community engagement. It's a bit of a kind of a toss-up, I think, in the end of like, I can see why snagging is the way it is, but I also think that it really should focus more on that consistency, because I think that consistency with the obscurity, just like I said, just keeps things a little bit more reliable, a little bit easier, and I think it could add a new depth of interest to fishing in general. And if we're like, oh, well, it's just adding more layers of RNG and stuff, well, snagging is a binary thing. It either it doesn't bite or it does, if you have snagging on, or off, I should say. So being able to have that, I think, would be an interesting way to add more engaging potential stuff to fishing without making it just another layer of RNG, which I know a lot of people, especially nowadays, are getting a little frustrated by. I also just think that, if it wasn't just meant for like one or two fish in expansion and maps, there would just be more, it would just be more flavor to fishing. And fishing is already very, very flavorful when you look at it, which is weird that I'm mixing metaphors here, but I think snagging is a skill that has a ton of potential. I expect it to get like combined with salvage and potentially removed in 8.0. Though again, I also said that at the end of 6.0 and nothing changed. But I think it needs that second chance. It needs that second look. It needs to have that pass of, here is what snagging should be used for. And I think it should be used in many things. And there does need to be some design changes, I think, where maybe it's more clearly represented that snagging is needed for a fish or in a fishing hole. I'll leave that up to designers. Like, obviously, that's going to be a thing that needs to happen. But I really think that snagging is a very interesting skill that is worthy of another look. It doesn't need a rework. It just needs more fish that require it. But that's it for now. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Good luck, and happy fishing.